If you've watched my videos in the past, you'll know that in the corner of my workshop I have an old Mantis microscope, as used on all Federation starships. When I came to use it a couple of weeks ago, just like you see Janeway here, I pulled it forwards and there was a loud crack and the whole head fell forwards and hit the deck. When I came to have a look what went wrong, I seem to have a rather badly broken support bracket here. This thing's made of plastic. Maybe it should have been made of metal, but it's obviously dried out and gone brittle with age. Now I cobbled this microscope together from two broken ones, and I do have a remaining faulty brace unit, still with a good bracket on it, so I may be able to swap that over. But in the meantime, I've lately been bombarded with adverts from a well-known Chinese company, and strangely, just when I needed it, up pops an ad for a digital microscope. So I thought, well, now's probably a good time to spend a small amount of money and try this out. So I've ordered it up. It was very cheap, only 25 quid for a brand new customer deal. So let's have a look at this thing and see whether it's any use. So first off in the box there's a printed manual. It makes some claims about the image size that I would dispute, but we'll get to that. But it's pretty straightforward, a couple of pages and then repeated in many languages. There's a 16 gig memory card. Note there was a choice of either a 4 gig or a 16 gig at no difference in price, so that's a bit of a no-brainer. There's a CD, not seen one of those in this kind of box for a long while. Software, I guess. This thing is some kind of light diffuser. And there's a wired remote control, which it turns out is actually superfluous because there are buttons on the front of the microscope itself that do the same job. And then this is the main unit, screen and microscope in one. And in the bottom here there's a USB-C charging cable, the base with a couple of additional lights on goosenecks, and this thing is the support bracket. So here on the base there is a micro USB connection to power the lights and also a dimmer switch. And the support pillar just screws on, although when you get to the end stop it isn't where you want it, so there's a locking ring. All you have to do is set the centre position and then turn the ring. There are various thumb wheels here, but there are the ones for raising and lowering the microscope, and the one at the back just adds a bit of friction so it stays in place. Then the microscope itself just slots into that ring, and the two thumb wheels just behind it are there to lock it in place. And then there's this diffuser, which, well, it's supposed to be a bayonet fit, but I found it really not very positive at all. It sort of pushes on and turns, and I mean it works, it just doesn't feel very professional. So this remote control needs to be connected, although to be honest the display does everything you need off the front panel buttons, but this does provide a way of getting power to the base. So that plugs into the side, and I'll just show you what the other connections are on that side. There's a USB-C power lead, goes in there, and then the memory card, remote, and finally a brightness control for the LEDs that are inside the microscope itself. And the buttons that control the thing, there are 3 there, and there are 3 on the other edge as well. Right, I'll just plug the memory card in. Here's that additional power lead. It's a micro USB, so it doesn't get confused with the other socket. That just plugs down into the base to power those gooseneck LED lights. And finally there's this USB-C lead, and I now need to go and find something to plug into that. Bear with me. Okay, it's all charged. This is what happens when you switch it on. I'm running purely off the batteries here. This is the focus control, and I have to say that's not a bad picture at all. There's a lot of glare here, but I think it's reflecting off that base plate. Could have been matte black really. Clearly a bit of a learning curve positioning those lights, and I want to make sure they don't get in the way of a soldering iron as well, but we'll see. Playing around with the menus, it has 3 modes: recording, still, and playback. I'm not convinced about the resolution option that it gives you. It's set to 1080, and the file that comes out of it is 1080. But resolution wise I think it's probably more like 720. While I set the date here, I need to point out that the still resolution defaults to 5 megapixels, but the settings go all the way to 16 megapixels. I tried both and I can't see any difference, and I think that their claims of high resolution are just merely interpolated, and the real resolution is probably that same 720 that you get from the video. Not that that's a criticism, it's just not as described, but it's fine, the pictures are good. There's a lighting frequency defeat here, 50 or 60 Hz. Unfortunately my lights are at 50 Hz and my phone is at 60, and neither are configurable, so I have no idea which of those to select. So there are a few other options, but they're not particularly interesting. The menu does change depending on whether you've selected still mode or video mode. A few different options, but again, nothing really to be bothered with. Oh, and the version is version 1. There doesn't appear to be a downloadable firmware update for it. Not that I found anything badly wrong in the software, so it should be fine. Now I don't know where their claims of 1200 times zoom come from, not sure how they would have calculated that number, but the truth is there is no zoom feature on this. If you want to zoom, you have to raise the microscope up to the maximum point, that's your furthest out zoom, adjust the focus, there it is, and then to zoom in, you lower the microscope down, and again refocus. And there's a limit to how far you can come down before the microscope obscures the light and causes glare or whatever. So here I am trying to see how close I can get. And the thing is, this is all very well for inspection, But if you wanted to get a soldering iron under there, you'd really struggle. So again, for soldering, you're going to have to set maybe a midpoint and live with the fact that it isn't quite as zoomed in as you might like. And yeah, I've gone too low there and there's no light getting underneath, so that is not really a viable option. A little bit higher, that's probably the maximum magnification. But as you can see, I can't really get a soldering iron under there to do anything useful, so inspection only. Raise it a bit, refocus, and now can I get a soldering iron in? Yeah, I mean it's not perfect, but I can manage. I've had to work it with worse problems with microscopes before, so yeah, that'll do. Need a thinner tip. Now I wanted to show you the one limitation of this thing. You can't really get a large circuit board in there because the support pillar stops you from reaching more than a few inches in. Now if you look at this website, Tomlov, they appear to sell the same microscope, but they also do a big range of others, and this one has a boom attached, and effectively it would work like the Mantis. That's worth considering if you can afford the extra money. Now let's have a look at the supplied software that was on that CD. So it has a device driver selection, and microscope doesn't show up, of course. I need to switch it on. Let's have a look at the screen. Okay. So when you've got the USB connected, it boots up and immediately asks you what you want to do. So we need to select PC camera. And then we have nothing happening because I need to close the software and reopen it again. Wait a minute. Right, now in the devices we've got a new item, and when we select that, well, nothing much happens. This doesn't really seem to do very much, this software. It has a capture and it has a still image, and when it does it, it doesn't display what's going on, it just does it, and yeah, very rudimentary, not much use. However, if we run the Windows camera facility, which is just part of Windows, we do better. That's a view from my tablet at the back. Let's switch cameras, and that's now gone to the front camera. Switch again. There we go, great, that's a really good picture. So that's working, and you can do stills and recording from this app. Interestingly, if I ask this program what resolution we're running at, there's only one option, that's 720p for video, and what looks like a still frame from a 720p video for snapshots. So I think that's probably the true resolution this microscope's running at. Now for comparison, here's a recording made directly on the microscope onto its SD card, which does come through as a 1080 file, but when I zoom in on it, well, the pixels don't quite line up. I think the pixels that are in the file are bigger than 1080p, so I think again you're talking about 720. Now when you're soldering under microscopes, very often the fumes can wick up and attach themselves to the lens. Some microscopes actually come with a protective cover. This one of course doesn't, and the lens is enclosed in a plastic housing. Can't get to it to clean it. So what I've done is I've ordered a small piece of glass. It's 34.5mm across, 35 would do. It's supposed to be a watch lens replacement. You can find those readily on eBay. And I'm just going to glue it in, dot it in, not solidly, as an experiment. Now I'm not sure whether I might get some glare reflected up from this, but I don't think so, because the lights are supposed to be bounced around the outside of this, not through the middle. So I have high hopes that this will do as protection, and I can just wipe any stains off that if I happen to get any. So would I recommend this thing? Well, at the price I paid, I can't really complain at all. It is a little bit flimsy. It feels more like a home use product than a commercial one. And of course it has the limitation that you can't really get anything big underneath it because of that support pillar being in the way. So if I was spending more money, I'd look for one that had an articulating arm. Having said that, for a first microscope, and one that you can record digitally, it's really excellent. It does do the job it's supposed to. Alright, so while I'm in a microscope mood, what about this Mantis? Well, this is the spare base unit, and as I already explained, the power supply in this doesn't work. So unfortunately I can't just swap that in to fix up the problem. I have to actually remove the bracket. And there's a giant powerful spring attached to that bracket, and I've made a spring puller out of a bent screwdriver. So now I'm just at the point where I'm going to remove this piece of plastic, hoping that it's fully intact, and then I can just rebuild the other bracket and all will be well. And yeah, this one actually looks in much better condition than the one I was using. Now of course, having got this far, I can't help myself. I've got to go and have a look and find out why the power supply doesn't work on this thing. And with hindsight, maybe it would have been better to do this before I took the bracket off, because having fixed the power supply, I could just swap this whole thing in. Anyway, to get the thing open, you have to undo these two bolts, and that allows you to take the base plate off. And at first it doesn't look like there's much accessible in there at all, but there's a sliding piece on top with a switch in it. All you have to do is pop the switch through, and then you can slide that piece out. Now underneath there, surprise, it isn't really much of a power supply. There's a transformer giving you 12 volts AC and a switch and a fuse. So I guess what, that's a 20-to-1 transformer. So either I've got a bad winding or a loose connection. There's nothing coming out of that. I guess I'm expecting to see 12 volts AC, but I'm getting 0. Let's measure. There's a little screw terminal block with a connection there. Let's have a look what that's got on it. And yeah, so I've got my 12 volts there, but there's nothing coming out the other end. So broken connection somewhere. Now I took the wires out of the screw terminal block, and look, they've screwed down onto the insulation. So it was very hit and miss as to whether there was going to be any connection in there at all. So I trimmed that back, reconnected, and let's take another measurement. There we go. That's all there was to it. Just a bad connection. So yeah, I didn't need to take the bracket off, but this is where we are. So let's put this thing back together. This is the original one now with the new bracket. Right, that's the spring done. I'll just show you that working. There we go, it's working. So now I've just got to complete getting all the other bolts in. It's quite fiddly, there's lots of little washers and bits and pieces, and it does its best to get the alignment slightly out so that the bolts won't slide in easily, but after a bit of trial and error and retrying again and again, eventually I got it right. And this right angled knob is the control that you use to tighten up the head so that it stays in position you put it. Here is the head. There's one big bolt that holds this on, and then a nylon washer and a lock nut. And yeah, it does its best to fight back and not go into position, but there we go. And there it is, complete again. Well, until something else goes wrong with it. I'm never going to be able to replace that broken bracket, so I will only ever have one working one. But it will do for now. So that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time when I'll find something else to break.